I've been a structural engineer long enough to develop two superpowers. I can spot a bad idea from 30 feet away, and I can keep a straight face while someone confidently explains to me why gravity is kind of a suggestion. We'd been married 5 years, together a little longer, and somewhere between her turning 30 and me turning into the human version of a building code appendix. So when we bought our dream fixer-upper in suburban Connecticut, I saw opportunity. Not the Pinterest kind, the real kind. Old framing, solid bones, 2 stories, central support line running clean through the first floor. It needed updating, sure, but structurally, it was honest. Sarah saw potential. The first few weeks were good. We walked through the house together, arguing playfully over paint colors, laughing about the hideous floral wallpaper in the dining room. We agreed on one rule: no major structural changes without discussing them together. Seemed reasonable. I design bridges for a living. She handles branding and marketing. We both stay in our lanes. That lasted about 3 weeks. One evening, Sarah came home glowing in a way that had nothing to do with me. "Okay," she said, dropping her bag and smiling at her phone. "Don't freak out." I didn't freak out. I've learned that tone. It's the prelude to, "I made a decision, and now I'm informing you." "I talked to Julian," she said. "Who's Julian?" "From college," she said, like that explained everything. "He's an interior designer now, like high-end. He works on luxury properties in New York. He has this whole philosophy about space and emotional flow." I stared at her. Emotional flow. "Yes," she said excitedly. "He agreed to help us. For cheap." "How cheap?" "David, that's not a number." She waved it off. "It's basically a favor. His normal rates are insane." "People with insane rates rarely work for favors," I said. She smiled in that way that meant she'd already decided. "You'll like him." I doubted that immediately. Julian arrived the next afternoon wearing a coat that probably had its own insurance policy. Perfect hair, immaculate boots that had never met mud, dust, or a single splinter. He stepped into the house slowly, like the air itself needed to adjust to him. "Wow," he said softly, scanning the living room. "This space is tense." Sarah looked at him like he'd just translated the house's feelings. He drifted from room to room, touching walls, standing in doorways with narrowed eyes, occasionally humming. I followed behind, hands in pockets, observing the observer. Then he stopped in the center of the first floor and pointed directly at the wall that ran down the middle of the house. "That," he said, "has to go." I kept my voice calm. "That's probably load-bearing." He smiled gently. "Everything is load-bearing if you're afraid of change." I blinked once. "That's not how structural systems work." Sarah laughed. At me. "It's just a wall," she said. "It's likely the central support line," I replied. "The second-floor joists probably terminate into it." Julian crouched, as if examining something profound. "We want openness, air, flow. Right now, the house feels boxed." "It's a rectangle," I said. Sarah sighed. "David, not everything is about calculations." "No, just the parts that keep ceilings off your head." Later that evening, after Julian left, I checked the basement. Sure enough, joists running straight into that wall. Clean load path. Remove it without installing a properly sized beam, and you'd introduce deflection across the span. At best, you'd get cracks and sagging. At worst, long-term structural movement that turns into very expensive regret. Over the next week, Julian became a regular visitor to the house we were planning to renovate. Always mid-morning. Always dressed like he was about to give a TED Talk on minimalism. Sarah rearranged her schedule to be there with him. "It's easier to collaborate in person," she said. I noticed small changes. She started keeping her phone face down. If I walked into a room, she'd subtly angle the screen away. Once, I saw her smiling at a message. The second I entered, the smile vanished. Too quick. "Who's that?" I asked casually. "Just design stuff," she said. "Design stuff." Julian began speaking to her in a low, intimate tone. They'd stand close, heads bent over his tablet. He'd whisper about texture narratives. She'd nod like he was revealing secrets of the universe. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then one evening I came home from a long day on site and decided not to text before stopping by the house. I walked in quietly. They were in the living room, leaning over a makeshift table covered in drawings. Julian stood close to her, too close, their shoulders almost touching. She was laughing, not polite laughter, real laughter. Julian noticed me first. "David." Sarah turned quickly. "Oh, you're here." "I own the place," I replied calmly. Julian slid a set of plans toward me. We finalized the concept. I looked down. There it was. A thick red line drawn across the central wall. Removed for open space concept. No beam drawn in. No structural note. Just gone. I inhaled slowly. "Julian, do you know what that wall does?" "It divides the room," he said. "It supports the second floor." He smiled faintly. "That's a very rigid way to see it." "It's an accurate one." Sarah crossed her arms. "You're not even trying to be open-minded." "I am," I said evenly. "If you want it removed, you need temporary shoring and a properly sized steel beam installed. Depending on the span and load, you're easily looking at serious reinforcement cost." Julian shrugged. "We can install a header." "For a doorway," I said, "not for an entire load path." He laughed softly. "Engineers always assume catastrophe." "We design for reality." Sarah's expression hardened. "God, you're such a buzzkill," she snapped. "Not everything is a disaster. This is art, David. You build bridges and warehouses and think that makes you the authority on everything. You're just threatened by Julian's talent." "I'm not threatened," I replied. "I'm explaining how the house stands." "I didn't ask for your advice," she said sharply. "Julian is the professional here. If you can't respect that, then get off the site." Julian didn't interrupt. He didn't have to. Sarah stepped closer to him, and then she took his hand. Deliberate. Public. A line drawn. I looked at their hands for a moment. Then I looked at her. "You're serious?" I asked. "Yes," she said. Something inside me went very quiet. Not anger. Not shock. Clarity. "Okay," I said. She blinked. "Okay? If I'm not needed here, you two handle it." I picked up my keys from the table. "You're just leaving?" she asked. "You said get off the site," I replied calmly. "I respect professionals." Julian's smile widened slightly. I walked out of my own house, the project house, the one in my name, and drove back to the townhouse alone. Not defeated, just aware. Because I build structures for a living, and when someone removes the load-bearing element and pretends everything will hold, I don't argue. I step back and let physics do the talking. I didn't go back to the renovation house the next day, or the day after that. Not because I was sulking. I don't sulk. I analyze. Sarah didn't text much that evening. When she got back to the townhouse, it was late. She smelled faintly of sawdust and something expensive that wasn't ours. "You really embarrassed me today," she said, dropping her bag. "I explained structural load," I replied. "If that's embarrassing, we have different definitions." She didn't laugh. "You were condescending." I was correct. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. But it's also not wrong. She went to shower. I stayed in the kitchen and opened my laptop. Not to argue, to check paperwork. When we bought the fixer-upper, I'd insisted on one thing Sarah had called unnecessarily controlling. For legal and financial reasons, the house was in my name. At the time it was practical. My credit, my income structure, cleaner tax setup. Sarah hadn't cared. "It's ours," she'd said. "Paperwork doesn't matter." Paperwork always matters. The renovation budget, however, was mostly coming from Sarah's inheritance. She'd been proud of that. "I want to invest my money into our future," she'd told everyone. "Fine. Cosmetic upgrades can be funded by whoever wants marble countertops. Structural liability? That's mine. I leaned back and thought, if they removed that wall without proper permits, without engineering plans, without inspections, the liability wouldn't magically become artistic. It would be legal. The next morning, Sarah left early again. I'll probably be there all day, she said casually. Pull permits before you remove anything structural, I said. She gave me a look. Julian is handling it. Is he licensed in this state? Yes. That wasn't what I asked. After she left, I made 2 calls. The first was to a contractor I've worked with for years. Hypothetical, I said. 2-story house, late 70s. Central load-bearing wall removed without proper beam sizing. What happens? He laughed immediately. How bad? Let's say, enthusiastic designer bad. Then you're looking at sag, cracks, doors start sticking. If they really get creative, long-term structural distortion. How fast? Could show up within days if the span's wide enough. Nice. David. Yeah? Don't let idiots near your house. I almost smiled. Working on it. The second thing I did was draft an email to the local building department. Subject, concern regarding potential unpermitted structural work. I listed the address. I noted that structural elements might be removed without approved plans or issued permits. I expressed concern about safety risks and requested verification. No accusations. No emotional language. Just information. I hit send. Then I went to work. When Sarah came home, late again, she looked tired but charged, like someone running on adrenaline. You're quiet, she said. Long day, I replied. She hesitated. You're not still upset about the wall, are you? No, I said truthfully. She looked relieved. I just want you to trust me, she added. Trust. Interesting choice of word. The next afternoon, I drove past the project house on my way back from a site meeting. There was a pickup truck parked out front. No company logo, no business name. 2 guys unloading tools. Cash crew. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I got a text from Mark, an old friend who lived on the same street as the project house. I asked him to observe what was happening. There's serious noise, like demo noise. I called him. Anything posted on the door? Permit sheet? Don't see one. I thanked him and hung up. Then I checked the town's online permit portal. Nothing filed under our address, nothing pending. Timing, as always, is everything. The following morning, I received a confirmation email from the building department. Inspection scheduled, concerns noted. That afternoon, Sarah called me instead of coming home. Her voice was tight. You won't believe what happened. Try me. An inspector showed up, out of nowhere. Out of nowhere? I repeated. He said someone reported unpermitted structural work. Julian was furious. I imagine he was. They stopped everything, she said quickly. It's just temporary. We'll fix it. Did they remove the wall? Silence. They opened it up. How far? They took most of it down. Did they install temporary shoring? Another pause. I don't know. That answer told me everything. She shifted tone. The inspector was acting like we were reckless. Were permits pulled? No, but... Then he was doing his job. Her frustration sharpened. Why are you not on my side? I'm on the side of structural stability. You sound like you wanted this. I almost laughed. I warned you. She hung up soon after. The next morning, an official notice arrived by email. Work halted pending structural review. Site flagged for potential unsafe conditions. Fast, very fast. By late afternoon, Mark sent another message. You might want to swing by your place. I was still at the office. Why? There's cracking along the front facade, around the second-floor windows. I stared at the screen for a second. Cracks that visible meant one thing, movement. I called him. How bad? Not massive, but noticeable. They weren't there last week. Anyone there now? Yeah, some crew, and your designer guy. Of course he was. I ended the call and drove straight to the house. I didn't rush. I didn't speed. When you already know what's happening, panic doesn't help. When I pulled up, the pickup truck was parked crooked in the driveway. No company name, no branding, just tools scattered near the entry. I walked inside. The central wall was gone. Not opened, not partially modified. Gone. Drywall stripped, studs removed, ceiling patched awkwardly where they'd cut through. No visible steel beam, no proper shoring in place, just space. Julian stood in the middle of it like he'd just unveiled a masterpiece. "There," he said when he saw me. "Look at that openness." I didn't answer him. I looked up. The ceiling line wasn't perfectly level anymore. Subtle. But I noticed subtle. Sarah stepped forward. "We were going to tell you about removing a structural wall without permits?" I asked calmly. Julian gave a light chuckle. "Let's not exaggerate. It's an interior partition." "No," I said evenly. "It wasn't." One of the workers avoided eye contact. I walked toward the front windows and studied the hairline cracks along the plaster near the upper trim. There they were, small, but new. "You see that?" I asked Sarah. "It's normal settling," Julian jumped in. "A house that's been standing 40 years? I asked. Silence. Sarah crossed her arms. "The inspector already came. We're handling it." "Yes," I said. "I know." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You know?" "I understand how building departments respond to structural alterations." Julian looked irritated now. "You reported this." I didn't answer. Instead, I turned back toward the opening where the wall used to be. "Did you install temporary shoring before removal?" The workers stayed quiet. Julian answered instead. "We didn't need to." I nodded slowly. Physics had already begun answering for them. I left without arguing, because at that point, the damage wasn't theoretical. It was measurable. Over the next few days, things escalated quietly. The building inspector returned. Work officially halted pending structural evaluation. An orange notice was taped to the front door. "Unsafe to occupy until further review." Sarah didn't come home to the townhouse until nearly midnight that evening. She looked stressed. "They're overreacting," she said immediately. "The inspector is making it sound catastrophic." "What did he say exactly?" I asked. "That we need a licensed structural engineer to assess the load path." "That's accurate." She rubbed her temples. "Julian says it's fixable." 2 days later, Mark texted again. "They've got more cracks now. Sidewall too." I drove by the next morning. The facade had developed thin diagonal lines near the corners of the upper windows. Doors inside no longer closed cleanly. You could feel slight resistance, deflection, not dramatic collapse, just enough movement to remind you that structures don't appreciate improvisation. I stood in the empty living room, the new open concept, and looked at the ceiling. Julian wasn't there that day. Sarah was. "We can fix this," she said quickly. "We'll add a beam." "You should have added one first," I replied. She flinched. "We didn't think it would." "I know." There was something different in her tone now, less arrogance, more edge, but not regret. Not yet. That evening, she didn't come home again. She texted, "Staying late." I didn't respond. The next morning, I was at my desk when my phone buzzed. It was Mark again. "You busy?" "Depends." He didn't text back immediately. Instead, a photo came through, taken from across the street. My house in the background, Sarah in the driveway, Julian standing close to her, very close, her hands resting on his chest, his hand at her waist. Then the next image, her leaning up and kissing him, not friendly, not accidental, deliberate. I stared at it longer than I expected to. There's something about confirmation that silences doubt completely. I called Mark. "I didn't want to assume," he said quietly. "But Yeah. Thank you, I replied. You okay? I'm informed. He hesitated. You want me to do anything? No. I ended the call and looked at the image again. Zoomed in. Her face. Not confused. Not forced. Certain. That night, when she finally came back to the townhouse, she walked in cautiously. You're awake, she said. Yes. She looked at me for a long second, like she was measuring what I knew. I slid my phone across the table toward her. She picked it up. And for the first time since this started, she didn't have a quick answer. She stared at the photo for a long time. Finally, she set the phone down very carefully, like it might explode. It's not what you think, she said. I leaned back in my chair. That's impressive, because it looks very specific. She exhaled sharply. We were just kissing, I finished. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply watched her. It was a moment. At 11:38 p.m. in the driveway, after you told me you were meeting a contractor, she pressed her lips together. You've been distant, she added after a moment, as if that might rebalance the scale. You've been gone all the time, working, thinking about beams and permits and everything except me. I let her speak. The truth is, I had been working. Long hours, site visits, deadlines. That was never a secret. But this wasn't about overtime. This was about proximity. I've been working, I replied. You're always working. I design structures for a living. That's not a hobby. You don't listen, she snapped. You don't see me. I saw you, I said calmly. In the driveway. She flinched at that. Silence settled between us. Then she tried a softer angle. It just happened. I almost smiled. No, I said quietly. Walls accidentally come down. This didn't. She looked at me like she wanted me to yell, like anger would make her feel less guilty. But anger gives people something to fight. Calm leaves them alone with themselves. You don't understand what it's like, she said. To feel inspired, to feel seen. By a man who convinced you to remove a structural wall without permits? Her jaw tightened. Stop turning everything into engineering. I'm not, I replied evenly. You chose him over basic safety. That's not a metaphor. She paced once across the kitchen. You reported the house, didn't you? I didn't rush to answer. The inspector didn't show up randomly, she continued. You knew we were moving forward. I warned you about permits. You sabotaged us. No, I said calmly. I stepped back when you told me to get off the site. She stared at me. That's why you were so calm. Yes, she laughed bitterly. You set this up. You removed a load-bearing wall without structural review, I said. I didn't need to set anything up. You were there, she continued, her voice tightening. You saw the cracks. You saw what happened. Instead of helping, you reported it. Her breathing grew shallow. You wanted to prove a point. No, I replied. I wanted the house to stay upright. She looked away. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I warned you, I said evenly. I had stood in that living room and told her exactly what removing that wall without reinforcement would do. I had explained load paths. I had mentioned beams. She had taken his hand. Now the house had answered. The inspector made it sound catastrophic, she said. Julian says it's manageable. Julian says a lot of things. She didn't argue. She didn't defend him the way she had a week ago. Instead, she looked tired. He thinks we can fix it by installing a beam now, she went on more quietly. That once it's stabilized, the cracks won't matter. I didn't laugh. I didn't mock. I just pictured the redistributed load, the slight shift already visible along the facade, the doors that no longer closed cleanly. You can correct a structural oversight, I said, but you can't pretend it didn't happen. That sentence hung heavier than the rest. Her eyes filled, but she fought it. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered. Nothing ever is. The woman in the photo had looked certain. charged, leaning forward into something she believed in. The woman sitting across from me now looked tired, smaller, like the math had finally started adding up in her head. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she repeated, almost to herself. I stood up without rushing, not dramatically, not in anger, just done with the conversation. She looked up at me quickly. "What are you doing?" "Packing." Her eyes widened slightly. "You're leaving?" "Yes." "For how long?" "I don't know." She shook her head, like this was somehow impulsive. "So that's it? You're just walking out?" I paused at the edge of the kitchen and looked back at her. "You told me to get off the site," I said calmly. She stood up now, panic creeping into her voice. "You can't just leave in the middle of this. The house is a mess. The inspector is coming back. I don't even know what we're supposed to do next." "You'll hire a structural engineer," I said evenly. "A licensed one." "David." "Yes. You're the structural engineer." I held her gaze. "I wasn't the professional," I reminded her. "Julian was." That landed harder than I intended. She took a step toward me. I was angry. "I didn't mean that." "You meant it enough." Silence again. She looked around the townhouse like she was seeing it for the first time. The temporary furniture, the half-unpacked boxes, the sense that none of this was stable anymore. "You're really going to leave me alone in this?" she asked, voice breaking. I didn't answer immediately. "I'm not leaving you in danger," I said finally. "The house isn't collapsing. It's unstable. There's a difference." "That's not what I mean." I knew, but I wasn't going to step into that meaning. I walked down the hallway to the bedroom and pulled out a small travel bag from the closet. I packed efficiently. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, my laptop, charger, toothbrush. She followed me, hovering in the doorway. "This is extreme," she said softly. "We can fix the house." "Yes," I replied. "The house can be fixed." She flinched at that. "And us?" she asked. I zipped the bag. "You removed a load-bearing wall," I said quietly. "Not just in the house." She closed her eyes. "That's not fair." "It's accurate." She leaned against the door frame, arms wrapped around herself. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I thought you were just being rigid. I was being responsible. I thought you didn't care. I cared enough to warn you." That hurt her more than yelling would have. I picked up the bag. "When are you coming back?" she asked. "I don't know if I'll ever come back," I said. At the front door, I stopped. For a moment, I looked at her, really looked at her. Not the woman in the driveway photo, not the woman defending a designer, the woman I had bought a house with. And then I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and walked to my car. No slammed doors, no dramatic speeches, just distance. Because sometimes the only stable move left is to step out of the load path. The hotel room smelled like industrial detergent and neutrality. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige everything. No history, no cracks, no emotional load. I liked it immediately. I set my bag down on the small desk and stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. Not the tense silence of a conversation paused mid-argument. Just quiet. The next morning, I drove to one of our company's regional offices 2 states over. I told my manager I'd extend the site review by a few days. He didn't question it. I have a reputation for over-involvement in projects. No one suspects the structural engineer of running away from home. By noon, my phone finally buzzed. Sarah. I let it ring once before answering. "Hi," she said, her voice already thinner than usual. "Hi. They're coming back tomorrow." "Who?" "The inspector. And another engineer. He wants an independent assessment." "That's good," I replied. "Good?" She almost laughed. "He said if the beam isn't properly sized, we'll have to open the ceiling again." "Yes." "He said the cracks could worsen if the load isn't redistributed correctly." "Yes." There was a long pause. He made it sound expensive. "It will be." She inhaled shakily. Julian says the inspector is exaggerating to justify the department's involvement. I leaned back in the stiff hotel chair. And what do you think? Silence. I don't know anymore, she admitted. That was new. I called him this morning, she continued. He said he's working on solutions. Is he on site? No, he said he has another project meeting. Of course he did. And the crew? I asked. They won't come back until the permit issue is resolved. That meant no one was touching it. Good. And the money? I asked. She hesitated. He said some of it already went toward supplier deposits. Do you have documentation? He said he'll send it. That answer again. The following day, she called again. This time she didn't try to sound composed. The engineer says the temporary load transfer caused uneven stress along the span, she said, voice shaking. He says we're lucky the joists didn't crack. Yes. He said the fines for unpermitted structural work could stack. They will. She was crying now, not loudly, not theatrically, just the sound of someone realizing the math is not on their side. I didn't think, I know. I thought you were overreacting. I wasn't. She let out a breath that sounded like something collapsing quietly inside her. Julian hasn't come by since yesterday, she said. I waited. He said he needed to consult with his legal advisor. That was interesting. For what? I asked. In case the department escalates. And has he mentioned refunding any funds? I asked calmly. Silence. That's what I thought, I said. You don't have to sound like that, she whispered. Like what? Detached. I considered that. I'm not detached, I said. I'm stable. Another silence. He said this happens all the time, she added weakly. That inspectors always overstep. And then, Julian blocked me. There it was. He said he needs to protect his reputation until this blows over, she continued. He told me not to contact him for a few days. A few days? Convenient? And the 30,000? I asked. She didn't answer. I didn't need her to. That evening, I opened my laptop and emailed my attorney. Subject, consultation request short. Direct. No emotion in it. The next morning, Sarah called again. They're estimating 40 to 50,000, she said immediately. For what? For the beam, reinforcement, inspection fees, facade repair? And that's if nothing else shows up. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. And the fines? I asked. Pending. She was breathing too fast. David, she said suddenly, voice cracking, I need you. There it was. Not I love you. Not I'm sorry. I need you. For the first time since I left, I felt something twist in my chest. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just the quiet recognition of responsibility. You didn't need me last week, I said evenly. I was stupid, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this, she said. You hire a licensed structural engineer, I replied calmly. You pull permits. You follow procedure. That's not what I mean. I knew, but I wasn't going to step into that gap yet. I'm meeting with my attorney tomorrow, I said. She went very quiet. For what? To understand my options. You're serious, she said faintly. Yes. This is just a mistake. No, I replied calmly. It was a series of decisions. The line stayed silent for several seconds. Then, softly, Are you coming back? I looked around the hotel room, bland, steady, quiet. I'm not stepping back under an unstable structure, I said. She didn't argue with that, because now she understood exactly what unstable meant. Divorce papers were filed 2 weeks later. The house remained taped off for nearly a month. The independent structural report confirmed what I already knew. Improper load transfer, temporary deflection, reinforcement required across the span. A custom steel beam had to be fabricated and installed properly. Sections of ceiling reopened. Portions of the second floor temporarily supported. The fines came through shortly after. Insurance refused to cover the unauthorized structural alteration. Julian never resurfaced. Apparently, once the building department started asking for licensing documentation, his New York portfolio became very busy somewhere else. There were rumors he had done something similar in another town. Creative vision meets municipal code. Municipal code usually wins. His phone went to voicemail permanently. His social media, however, remained active. Polished projects, filtered lighting, inspirational captions about vision and courage. He never mentioned Connecticut. Sarah hired a licensed firm. The beam was installed. The cracks were stabilized. The facade repaired. The house eventually stood straight again. But the repair cost nearly double what it would have if it had been done correctly from the start. That's the thing about structural shortcuts. They're never cheaper. Our divorce finalized 3 months later. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes. The property stayed in my name. The remaining debt for repairs and fines were paid by Sarah. Clean division. Clean exit. Months later, I drove past the house once. The new beam had been boxed in cleanly. Fresh paint. Clean lines. Open concept achieved. Properly supported this time. It looked good. Stable. But I didn't slow down, because I build structures for a living, and I've learned something simple. You can reinforce a house after you remove its support, but you can't always do the same with trust. And once something shifts far enough, you don't stand under it hoping it settles. You move. 6 months later, I stepped back into the house. The repairs had taken longer than expected. The first contractor Sarah hired cut corners again. The second one didn't. I brought in a licensed structural firm, approved the calculations myself, and watched the steel beam go in exactly where it should have from the start. No improvisation, no philosophy, just measurements, torque specs, inspection stamps. The ceiling was closed cleanly. The span was stable. The cracks were repaired properly, not painted over. Floors level. Doors aligned. Quiet. It cost more than it ever needed to. But it stood straight again. The first evening I walked through the finished living room alone, I stopped where the old wall used to be. Open space, clean lines, properly supported. It looked good. I ran my hand along the boxed beam detail overhead. Solid, stable, done right. You can fix a house after someone removes its support. But in marriage, unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.